Hello, and welcome to the Brave New Weed podcast. And now, here's your host, Joe Dolce.
Hi, Matthew.
Hello, Joe. How's it going? You're still in Tucson, is that right?
Oh, I'm in Tucson for the month at least. I am waiting out COVID.
Good.
Out of New York City. I just don't want to be in the epicenter at this moment. I'm still hoping to get Dr. Chin on the phone to do a podcast, but she has been so overwhelmed with, working in the ER. She's also she is arranging for masks and other equipment to be delivered from China. And I will include a link on that on the blog for other healthcare providers in need and in danger. So she's very busy. So I haven't really been able to engage with her, but life in New York is stressful these days. We are recording this on April 3rd, by the way. So how's life in Germany? Quickly.
We've been locked down. The numbers are on the rise, just like they are everywhere. We're very fortunate that our death toll is quite low. People are starting to get a little bit feisty. They just announced an extension of the lockdown protocols that they've issued all the way until the 20th of April. So it was initially just say, hey, we're going to look at this until Easter, 14 days, and now they've extended that out to the 20th of April. I honestly believe that it's likely they'll extend it again. I don't think that April 20th is enough time, but I don't know. That's not for me to decide. Otherwise, nothing big and scary going on. Leipzig itself, where I live and reside, has been treating some of the overflow from Italy. So the Leipzig hospital has been bringing people on and doing some study as well here locally. But honestly, it's pretty calm, and everybody seems to be weathering it fairly well.
Well, maybe calm is good. Who knows? Let's have a quick framework. Let's talk to our audience quickly today. I mean, we got great response on the podcast we did last week. Just talking to folks in the cannabis industry from Israel and Denver. The news is changing quickly, so we seem to be on it, and that's great. And I want to continue it this week. And what I've done is I've been thinking about dispensaries, Matt. Like, how is life in a dispensary going to change? Like, how you would normally go in and maybe smell your bud and follow the old precept of the nose knows what to buy.
Yeah, there'd be a lot of touching and examining and handing things back and forth, and
that ain't happening anymore, right? So how will dispensary life change? We managed to get Michael Monarch from dispensary in Talent, Oregon, to talk to us about what they're doing in response to COVID currently and how things are going to change in the future. We also have Dr. Sunil Aggarwal, who's in one of the epicenters. He's in Seattle, Washington. Now, Sunil is particularly interesting because he's a medical geographer, and medical geographers have been studying viruses and the spillover from animals into human populations for many years. So he's got some insight on that. He's also got some insight on some novel treatments that are happening, as well as some real hands-on experience of what's going on in the hospitals from his perspective. So without further ado, let's start with Sunil, who's joining us from Seattle, Washington today.
Listeners, you can join the conversation with Brave New Weed today by visiting us on any of our social media platforms. Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, all at Brave New Weed, will bring you to a place where you can like, comment, share the show, interact with other listeners, and keep the conversation going. Together, we are the world of Brave New Weed.
Sunil Aggarwal, tell me, what title are we using for you now? I mean, are you doing medical geography? Are you doing palliative care? Are you doing regular doctoring? Tell me everything. What's happening?
Right. I'm doing multiple types of doctoring, mostly in my specialty areas, which is palliative care and also rehabilitation medicine. And then you can layer into that integrative medicine, which is kind of specialty care that involves complementary and traditional approaches of care. And that's my medical practice, my research practice. Once you become a researcher, a scientist, a geographer, you can't stop doing that. That's how you view the world. And so I've, just, gotten off of a federal health thing where I was giving my perspectives as a practitioner, using my previous studies in medical geography to the National Cancer Institute and National Center for Complementary and Integrative Health, the NIH, to give some views on what I've learned as a medical geographer from the ethical lens, from the social, cultural, contextual lenses around cannabis use in cancer patients. So I'm doing that all the time. I'm writing some things. I've got some papers and chapters coming out. But my paid work, what puts food on the table, is seeing patients in the hospital and seeing patients in my clinic.
Well, that's what I want to talk about. But before we dig in, let's tell our listeners where exactly you are in the world.
I am in Seattle, Washington, the beginning of the national crisis for COVID-19 that's now unfortunately shifted to the other coast. But that's where I'm at right now, the big ground zero of the whole thing.
So let's just start at the beginning. What are you seeing? Let's talk about it. What did you tell NIH today? Tell our listeners.
Amazingly, this didn't have anything to do with COVID-19. I just think what's happening, people are carrying forward with their previous plans to talk about controversial things in healthcare, whether it's my areas of interest are cannabis and psychedelics, and it's sort of, I think there's more time to kind of reflect on things from your home work life situation. And they didn't, it was a pre-existing discussion, regarding how, cannabis can be utilized, in the treatment in cancer for cancer care. And there was the directors of the programs at the NIDA, NIDA, and the NCCIH. There's a bunch of alphabet soups, but basically different branches of the NIH, talked, and then they asked for perspectives of physicians in the community, and they asked myself and Dr. Jeff Hergenrather to speak, who's the president of the Society of Cannabis Clinicians. So it was really amazing for us to get 30, 40 minutes apiece with the at a public event, a course which involved the directors of the federal health research bureaucracy. And
it sort of sounds encouraging to me. This sounds, well, I mean, it's not a new topic, cancer care and cannabis. But so what new are you discussing with them, or are they just unaware of cannabis being used to help with treatment with chemotherapy and symptoms regarding?
I don't know if they're trying to kind of they represented their own positions on, well, this is what we're funding, this is what we're looking at. These are like the NIDA talks. It's just pretty standard things around cannabis as a increased rates amongst the elder populations, increased emergency room mentions, but we're interested in therapeutic uses. We don't know what those are, and boy, there are significant barriers to research, and we really hope those get better. And then the complementary and integrative side is like, let's try to get cannabis into the FDA drug approval pipeline so that we have more regular more regular products that we can compare. Of course, it's great to have nationally available same type of product, but they're also lamenting about how much we're not learning from what's going on, and that's due to the lack of funding and difficulties in getting research off the ground. And then they're also talking about how we need to look at minor cannabinoids and terpenes, and that they're funding basic science research around that. So that's kind of where things have been. But the fact that they're sort of also inviting perspectives from clinicians and people who've been working on the ground from the sort of bottom up, is new. And I got a chance to tell them, really, I share with them the entire arc of my work in this area of over 22 publications that I've put out since 2004 or 5 in different journals and book chapters, and just sort of showing my standpoint on these issues, both from the original research that I conducted for my dissertation, and also kind of my ethical orientation, looking at what are the ethics around cannabis use with prohibition in place, and how do we do a disservice to this topic when we don't recognize cannabis as a traditional plant medicine that people have long-standing heritage connections to in society.
Yeah, certainly.
Groups.
I'm reading a book called Spillover, which is about how viruses move from animal populations or insect populations, perhaps, into human populations. And it strikes me that this has a lot. I finally am understanding what medical geography is. So can you talk about this a bit, Sunil, and how what a medical geographer does, say, in a situation like COVID? I want to flip from cannabis to COVID. We'll keep moving back and forth here. There's so much to talk about with you.
Absolutely. I mean, it is the same. It is a flip of that, and this is what I ended up focusing on in my medical geography work was human relationship with plants, therapeutic plants. But I was looking at the frame. Medical geography sort of spans what we call disease ecology, which is what the book that you're reading is sort of starting to talk about, and health services delivery, which is kind of how health systems get spread out in space. But the work began with the ideas around what is going on with human encroachment into wilderness, certain forms of close quarters, like living situations like that lead to the spread of diseases like TB, for many years people have been talking about, well, there's going to be coming plagues. It's just a matter of when, given the way that globalization runs, and given the way that human-animal contacts are happening in certain kinds of ways due to encroachment or market practices, unsanitary practices sometimes, and that's just a fact of life that there's going to be novel viruses that are going to come out of the woodwork. And what can we do? There was a lot of work on whether global warming would lead to an increase of these because of the changes in patterns of mosquitoes and animal reservoirs, and there's still I mean, and it seems like the consensus is that yes, global warming will increase rates of flu and other viruses due to a host of factors, climatological factors. So disease ecology is the branch of medical geography that studies the relationship between diseases and the ecology in which they occur, and how does human environment relationships propagate or worsen the spread of diseases, and what can be done to contain them or prevent.
Well, let's ask that question, because it sounds like we're heading into constant disaster at the rate we're going here. Especially with the U.S. government's absolute ignorance and abnegation of climate science. What can be done?
No, I mean, we're kind of stuck now. I think currently we're dealing with a virulent virus that's easily spread and has novel features from animals that we haven't developed immunity to. So vaccine development is going to be the long-term fix, and there's early research coming out of China that you can help people with plasma donated from survivors to boost the immune response and less improve survival outcomes in people who are in the most virulent stages of the illness. So, and that's kind of immunotherapy, and that's also a sort of natural ecology to the rescue, because harvesting a natural product from somebody's body who's been exposed to a virus is kind of very, it's like an internal ecology of the body, developing antibodies and defenses, and then distilling those out and giving them to another person who doesn't have that. I think that to me is the most promising thing that I've seen in terms of dealing with the people who are acutely ill right now. And they're trialing different drugs. They're, of course, putting them on ventilators to see if they'll respond well. And some people do get off and some people don't. And I'm just hoping that we operationalize those kind of things. Is also that the Naturopathic Association, the American Naturopathic Association, which is the group that represents all the naturopathic doctors in the country, they have recommended, based on data that's come out of China, that intravenous vitamin C or ascorbic acid should be given in the hospital as well to those patients because of the they have recommended a whole, I think it's 25 grams. They have a whole dose protocol that they just put a press release out yesterday on. So it's very, they have a protocol and it's been tested in China, who's, has been more open to things like vitamin C. We already knew for a long time in this country that vitamin C could be helpful in sepsis, in other kinds of viruses, and other, illnesses. So it's just, again, so many things. This pandemic is showing us the extreme shortcomings of our disorganized, for-profit, driven healthcare system that's really not much of a system at all. It's just a bunch of different kingdoms and fiefdoms. And then also the lack of integration of traditional complementary integrative modalities like vitamin C or these plasma sharing, which is kind of a little bit not as traditional, but I mean, it just shows that we don't think of this as a unit. Now, I think things are going to change. I'm hoping, the hope is that this forces us to rethink our systems. If we can do this for COVID-19, change our lives this way, and why can't we do this for hunger or for the millions of people that die, thousands of people that die each year due to lack of adequate health care in this country, lack of adequate housing, lack of adequate, all the basics of public health 101 that we...
Well, we don't really do public health at this point in this country. Let's just be, let's just be honest about it.
It's funny.
It really is showing the shortcomings. I just want to ask one more question about this 25 grams, which is 25,000 milligrams of vitamin C. Are you talking about that daily IV, or are you talking about that over a period of time?
I think when we do vitamin C, the naturopaths I work with that give vitamin C to treat, to improve people's immune function when they're dealing with other types of viral syndromes. They don't do it every day. It's like, it's like a boost treatment. And I think there's an idea that you can do a course a couple of times, once a week. And it's kind of like a boost that helps to boost the internal responsive of the immune system.
I want it right now. I also like the idea of IV because it's not going through the digestive system, right? So it's not wreaking havoc with the stomach.
Yes, exactly. IV is the way to go. It's the only way to really get the doses that you need.
Is there any evidence at all about the medicine that Trump is promulgating? It's the malaria medicine, I believe.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know yet. There's some promising data, is what I've seen, but I don't know if it's. I mean, that's what they're doing in the hospital that I work in. Where I do palliative consults, the hospital doctors are following the protocol of hydroxychloroquine, which is an anti-malarial. And they're also using azithromycin, which is an antibiotic. I don't know. I wish I could tell you that.
Yeah, nobody knows.
We need more data, more research, and I think there was some promising data out of Germany, but there are those medicines do have toxicities. Is the issue, and I think if you can, vitamin C is not as toxic. So if I had to choose, I would try vitamin C.
Oh yeah, I remember
first.
I took that malaria medicine once, actually to prevent malaria, when I think I was in India or Burma, and it is tough going. It made you crazy. I mean, I think I stopped thinking I'd rather just have malaria than have this. No,
Exactly.
it is a rough medicine. Let me ask you: are you doing palliative care with patients with COVID at this point?
Yeah, I mean, we are gearing up for the surge that's going to be coming, and we are. My colleagues are doing it. I personally have not had a conversation, seen a patient yet. There was one patient on my service who had been seen by another one of my colleagues. I'm not there every day. I'm just kind of picking up some shifts to help out. And that patient, had she was in her 60s and had diabetes and got sick, trouble breathing. COVID positive, was placed on a ventilator, and the family they met with the family to discuss, well, how long should we try this? How long would she be willing to withstand this if things aren't turning around? And they tried for a few days. She just wasn't improving. Had to increase the settings. Things weren't looking good, and they compassionately withdrew the ventilator, and she died. And so our palliative care is about helping patients and families set the goals of care, especially in these kind of scenarios. What are the limits that you'd be willing to, what are the burdens you'd be willing to endure? What are the benefit for what benefits? What are your absolute, situation where this outcome would be worse than death itself, a life, in a way in which you're, on life support constantly, or if you had, if you had brain injury due to lack, cardiac arrest due to, virus and illness getting out of hand, what form of function would be acceptable to you? I mean, those are, unfortunately, these are real questions that patients and families agonize over. Families agonize over answering that for their loved ones when they haven't had these conversations up front.
Sure.
And
these are hard
there's a lot of
conversations
guilt associated with them.
Yeah, these are tough conversations, but obviously they're crucial conversations to be having, right? Boy, I mean,
Exactly.
Is there a guide that one has that you give to families before patients get into this situation?
We're trying. I mean, that's what it is. There's an effort to do that. It's just you have to act so fast sometimes by the time people get to the emergency room in respiratory distress because of the people are very much loath to go to the hospital because they don't want to end up losing their house or, not paying their
oh my
debts.
God, it's just appalling. It's terrible.
It is still and so like in our system, it's a crisis medicine. So you wait until things get really bad before you actually deal with all the nonsense and paperwork. And so I think that's one of the issues when it comes to something like this. If you had more time, if you have chronic illnesses, and those are the group that is, of course, most at risk, they should be having conversations, advanced care plans with their primary doctors.
So Sunil, there you are working in the hospitals in Seattle. What are you seeing? What's your life like? What do you do every day?
Yeah,
that's 3 questions, and I'm sorry. How about what are you seeing? Let's start with that.
I do palliative care in the hospitals when I do have shifts. So I'm a consultant for the primary hospital teams or the intensive care doctors when they need guidance to help patients better clarify their goals of care when facing serious or life-threatening illness. So my specialty is in palliative care. Our procedure is a family meeting. So we're able to use advanced communication skills and gather the right family members together if needed, or if a patient doesn't have family or wants to not involve family, talk to a patient directly. Usually patients want to have other members of their community present to discuss matters of life and death, serious illness. What do you do in a certain scenario? What's a line that they would not want to cross? Advanced care planning, we call that. And
yeah, it all sounds it all sounds super clinical the way you're describing it. But how do you do it? Here's my question: how do you do it? Be emotionally present and caring, and at the same time have enough strength to keep doing this time after time again. I mean, that's a really fine balance to watch, I think.
Absolutely. I mean, there's nothing more real than this in a patient's life. Sometimes patients are not with it at all. And so you have to talk to other folks. And it's a little different compared to if you're talking to them very directly and they're aware of things. Let's say they're tied to a machine that's pushing oxygen into their nose, but it's something that's very uncomfortable for them, and they want it to be done with it. So you have to be able to recognize the distress in their words, in their face, in their body language, in their emotional presentation, and just sort of acknowledge it. I can see this is difficult for you. I can see this is terrible. I wish this wasn't the way it had to be. So it's about sitting down at their level and trying to connect on that sort of just the human level of the difficulty and distress, calling it out, making space to allow for the emotions to be present. And then once you acknowledge those, try to ask open-ended questions to elicit their wishes and responses around their, the medical condition that's kind of creating such is becoming very serious or critical, and asking them, questions or making recommendations if they want those. So it's like that. It's like anything that's a hard topic to talk about. You have to just know how to, and that's part of the training that we go through in palliative care fellowships. It doesn't make it easier, but I do know what medicines to use more rapidly to help people get very comfortable, if that's the route they're going to take, and how to help sort of guide them through the difficult process of seeking care that's life-prolonging, at the same time of seeking care that's palliative, or when does palliative predominate and life-prolonging care no longer is serving the goal that they have in mind for themselves. So
yeah. I mean, this reminds me of a lot of the presentations I saw at the MAPS conference, which is the multidisciplinary studies of psychedelics, towards end of life. Now, do you have any experience, direct experience, or with patients using psychedelics to help people, I don't know, come to terms with the fact that they are not going to live beyond a certain point?
I do. Not as much as I want to. I had an opportunity when I was there and living in New York, at the NYU Medical Center. I connected with the psilocybin research group that was running a cancer anxiety study. And I attended a number of their team meetings and got to try to refer patients to them. Sometimes it was hard. And then one time got to observe some of a session. So the theory has been borne out with clinical studies now. We know that patients facing life-threatening illness, like cancer, if we give them a psychedelic session, psychedelic-assisted therapy session, which usually involves preparation, lots of preparation, supportive therapeutic session with psilocybin. They were doing 2 therapists at once in that model, a dyad they call that, and then follow-up integration visits. That alone can help a patient sort of have a trial run of what it would feel like to lose all attachments, and quote unquote sort of die in a very safe way, in a very comfortable way, in a way that's really not a death, but a sort of a reboot. changes the default mode network processing for a little while, and that this turns out to be a tremendously helpful intervention to lessen the anxiety associated with life-threatening illness for even a year after such a session. That's according to the research that came out of Hopkins. So I got to see some of that process happening as a resident at NYU, and then in my clinic here in Seattle, we are using ketamine, which is the legal psychedelic that's available. It's been around for a long time for anesthesia, but people didn't really use it sub-anesthetically to induce default mode network dissolution, but you can. It's very powerful. Near-death experience in a safe way. People have said that some of the qualitative reports out of near-death experiences match some of the qualitative reports out of ketamine trips. So I've had some patients with advanced cancer, prostate cancer patient comes to mind who had, was struggling with a lot of pain and worsening of his PTSD that he experienced because he had worked in refugee camps in Africa. He was from the East Coast, and he was struggling with pain in his body and sort of the trauma that was recreated from the prior refugee camps he'd worked in, and also his own childhood that was adverse, had a lot of adverse events in it. So the death, the life-threatening illness of prostate cancer, which had spread to his bones, was really starting to worsen his anxiety, worsen his pain. And so I recommended that he try some of these ketamine-assisted therapy sessions. And he did that with a nurse colleague of mine, and he had tremendous benefits. I also counseled him during the sessions before and after, and there was a tremendous amount of visioning of what it would be like to be on the Ganges River. He had traveled the world, and he had this dream of going to see the cremation or the grounds where people are cremated and ashes are thrown into the Ganges River in India. And he said he was there and had this very involved visionary experience, and it gave him quite a bit of relief from his anxiety doing a couple of these kind of sessions. His pain levels became much more manageable. His mood improved, and he's still working on treating his cancer. So this can change sometimes your availability to be present to treatments that could help. If you aren't being overcome by the existential dread of what you're facing, sometimes there's nothing else to do but just be present. And that's also, people come to that clarity as well. We're hoping to do more of that, especially in people's homes. Because really, a lot of these folks, it's hard to catch them, bring them into a clinic. You really have to sort of find them where they're at. But I think there's a lot of value for psychedelics for patients who are otherwise stable, to tolerate them. These patients that I see in the hospital, they are in extreme medical crisis because of breathing problems or heart problems, and sometimes it's really just about bringing that the presence of the chaplain or the social workers or the palliative care team to help them process those emotions in a sort of non-drug way, but in a very much more traditional way where we sort of pause and slow down and just acknowledge what's happening. It would be nice to be able to bring cannabis into places like this.
That was my next question. Where does cannabis fit into this? And by the way, I just want to point out that the whole quality of your voice changes, Sunil, when you talk about this. It becomes no, it really sort of goes down a notch. It relaxes. I hear your soothingness when you speak about these in these terms. It's very interesting. Well, it's just an observation, being a loud-mouthed, loud-voiced person myself. It's a comfort when people can use their voice to actually create a different vibration in the room, I think. Anyway, you're obviously very good at that. But what role might cannabis, or does cannabis play in this, in your perspective?
Yeah, it's funny you should ask this, because yesterday.
Well, this is a cannabis podcast. Go on.
I mean, what's amazing to me, some of the greatest things that I've had a chance to do in my professional work in medicine and research, yesterday came to fruition, because I got to answer that very question to the, on a national education course that was being put on by the National Institutes of Health, the National Cancer Institute, the National Institute.
Oh, what we were talking about earlier in the podcast.
Yeah, exactly. NIDA, National Cancer Institute, and National Center for Complementary and Alternative, or now it's Complementary Integrative Health. These are like largest research institutes around that focus on issues around cannabis, which the NIDA considers a drug of abuse. The Cancer Institute, which is interested in its role in all aspects of cancer patients, and the Center for Complementary and Integrative Health, which is interested in botanical herbal supplements. And it's kind of this, it doesn't really fit into their categories, but it's there, and they are now, bringing people together to talk about it, which it's been so prohibited. And one of the most,
please go on.
Sorry, I'm just going to say one of the most sort of taboo things for them to even understand is the role that cannabis can play in palliation of, on the spiritual health and well-being side. And I was so
talk to me about that. What role? Say it was legal, or it is.
Yeah.
Say you were able to use it. How would you? I don't know. Prescribe it, dose it. What would you do?
Yeah, I mean, it's very. This is you. I argued in that in that presentation that really a lot of what we consider as recreational cannabis use might in fact be better understood under the larger umbrella of spiritual health and well-being. And let me try to explain that a little bit. We normally think about spiritual health and well-being related to questions about meaning and joy, and finding your purpose. And what do people recreate for? Recreate comes from this word recreare, to create anew, and it's really it's part of the broader health requirement for us to be able to have these kind of outlets where we can find joy. And so, I mean, it's not that far from what we already know out there that people use cannabis for, but it's just reframing it that this is actually something that can help us deal with the anxiety of dealing with serious illness. In cancer, I say that it's euphoria, just the feeling of joy when you're dealing with lots of depression and sadness. Elation and euphoria can be a very therapeutic thing, just to feel that state when you're your days might be more numbered, when you're kind of feel like everything is that before and accepted is no longer going to be there or is threatened. I mentioned in the talk yesterday that the endocannabinoid system we know is critical for helping people forget things. And you kind of need to help forget some of the horrors you've been through. If you're a cancer patient who's been through chemo, radiation, and back into the hospital, and good news, bad news, they call it scanitis, the anxiety every time you go back for scans and find out whether it's getting worse, getting better. This last 6 months, was it for anything? All this suffering and the chemo brain and blah, blah, blah. So you have to kind of forget some of that in order to be present in the moment. If you're dealing, if you are kind of now shifting into like, I want to be able to enjoy what time I have and not constantly be worried, remembering the trauma of that ICU stay or that intubation or that surgery. So endocannabinoid system is a good one to tap into, and cannabis is well known to help people deal with that. So it's those pieces, and then it's an entheogen, so it means it's been used in the class of substances that have a history of helping people, find awe, and I think having those kind of experiences may help people find what truly is meaningful for them. Might help them clarify things, and that'll help them feel more comfort as well. So it's really a very open-ended kind of exploration. You can't really it's sort of a prescription is sort of like, well, doctor's orders, but it's like, well, this is a traditional medicine that has been used for spiritual well-being for centuries, in numerous cultural formations around the world. So our job is just to set up the conditions, like it's okay to use cannabis for this purpose. Here are some of the things that you might experience, and here's how much would be a safe amount to sort of explore with, and a safe method. I mean, that's what the medical support would be, just around making sure people have good supply, and that people have an idea of how to vaporize it or inhale it. And probably if you're in a hospital or a nursing home, they're not going to want, you don't want to be smoking, but you can use vaporizers or gummies, edibles, chewables. But, for naive folks, it's always good to use something that can come on and come off quickly in case.
Yeah, easy to control, of course. Well, I mean, this day should be here now. There's no doubt about it. It's pointless it's just ridiculous that it's not a medicine that's been used for 5,000, 6,000 years, millennia.
Yes, because imagine these patients I'm seeing right now, they won't have time to do a big psilocybin trip or ketamine several hours. I mean, but that actually we can do ketamine in the hospital, but cannabis is much more gentle. But good luck getting the framework, the sort of the frame of the hospital doesn't really include these kind of factors unless when things do change, when they say, okay, now we're going into palliative comfort care, they bring in coffee carts and cookies, and they close the door, or they allow for more privacy. There's more integration of music therapy. So that's about the only space where this kind of expectation of using medicines in this way, hopefully cannabis, maybe ketamine, would be allowed. Now, cannabis is illegal, so the hospitals don't want to sort of openly sanction it at the federal level. And that's all the other thing I was telling the federal health agencies yesterday, that they really have got to figure out, like they wanted to know what research they should be doing. I said, well, what is it that's keeping the Secretary of Health and Human Services, like the logjam of keeping cannabis in the recommending its maintenance in Schedule 1, and it should be out of there. It's so obvious that that's the case. Maybe you should research why it's not happening inside your institutions, why they're not working.
Excellent point. I think, or maybe we should get some good designers to design a little vaporizing holder underneath that cart that has the cookies and the other goodies on it, so one can just pull it out, take a few inhalations, pop it back, and boom. I mean, honestly, it's so crazy. Listen, I want to ask one more question, which is off the topic a little bit, but there's been a lot of talk, and I know a lot of people who've been experiencing a lot of prejudice for being Asian American. You are Indian American, correct?
Yeah, I'm an Indian, South Asian, Indian American. Yeah, that's right.
Okay, South Asian man. Are you experiencing any issues in this regard?
Thank you for asking that, Joe. I have not. I have heard about this in East Asian communities. That there's people are avoiding those neighborhoods in cities like the Chinatown, and I've heard about threats in Texas against Asian people. These kind of nonsense. But thankfully, it hasn't come my way. But I know that it's something that. And it's part of a long-standing tradition of association of, people that look different with disease or vectors of, filth and that kind of thing. And it's very, it's sad that,
It's sad that in the 21st century, this is going on, and that we have political people fostering it as well. It's appalling, and I'm happy to hear that it hasn't struck you personally, and I hope it continues that way for you. But I did want to raise it because I find it so disturbing, and so unnecessary, and just so wrong-headed on every level. And obviously in cannabis, I mean, it was associated with Mexicans and poor people and criminals, in the same way the current administration is also trying to associate Mexicans with these things. And it is a full circle, and it's still terrible that it's going on. I have very strong feelings about this.
Absolutely. I mean, cannabis, all these substances, cocaine, is tied to indigenous use in South America. And there's a long history of coca use and even, lower dose extractions of coca that have been used for millennia. And, the reason I'm bringing this up is because there's news that the U.S. is saber rattling with Venezuela right now and sending military vessels down there in the middle of a pandemic, trying to bring up the elected leaders of Venezuela on drug charges to the U.S., like they did with Noriega in Panama. And this kind of nonsense is, it's part of the whole imperial colonial, father knows best, the West knows best. The U.S. Is the moral policeman, and this whole it's tied into that. It's this racist idea. Like, imagine if somebody came and arrested Trump and says, we don't like the way that you misuse women. It's a violation of the international convention against the ending of all forms of discrimination against women, and we have put charges on you for being a global misogynist.
Well, I would second that emotion. I would go right for that, Sunil. I got to tell you. But listen, let me wrap by saying, if somebody wants to reach out to you or know more about your work, where would they find you?
We work at my clinic now. It's called the Ames Institute, so you can just go to amesinstitute.net. And then you can email. There's a contact there. Info at Ames Institute is how you reach me by email. I'm also on Twitter and Facebook. You can find those pages really easily. So I'm imminently reachable, and would love to hear from anyone with any questions or comments. And I'm just so grateful for folks like you out there, Joe, that are helping to bring some humor and compassion into people's lives. Awareness of the emotional toll this is taking, but also what's the humane things for us to do. It feels really, I think that's going to help a lot of people out there.
Well, thanks for doing the work you're doing, Sunil. I'll just remind listeners that it's Ames, AIMS
Institute, all spelled out. AIMS Institute, all spelled out.
Institute. Okay, very good. .net. I thank you for your time, for the work you're doing. I look forward to speaking to you again, and just take care. Keep going, okay?
Thank you, Joe. Same to you.
Our second interview is with Michael Monarch, who's one of the founders and owners of Green Valley Wellness, a cannabis dispensary in Talent, Oregon. Michael's going to talk to us about how life in his dispensary has changed and is going to be changing in the near and distant future. Hi, Michael. Would you introduce yourself, please? Tell me what your title is and where you are.
You bet. My name is Michael Monarch. I'm a co-founder, co-owner of Green Valley Wellness Dispensary in Talent, Oregon, as well as a recreational farm, Epic Family Farms, co-owner and co-founder as well.
Great. So I called, and thanks for joining today. I called because I'm thinking about life in the dispensary. And I'm thinking it's changing really probably pretty quickly thanks to COVID. Am I correct?
You are correct. We have the COVID shuffle is what we call it. We have some protocols lined up right now. They were implemented yesterday in full effect. We've been developing them over the last week. Once Oregon's Governor Kate Brown announced a stay-at-home edict and executive order last week, we were allowed to stay open, being an essential service like a pharmacy specifically.
That's good.
But we still want to protect our employees as well as our at-risk clientele. Our particular demographic that we aimed for when we opened was the baby boomer generation. The way we designed it, our extra level of service, and so quite a few of our clients are 60 plus, and so we know out of an obligation and the nature of this virus that we need to really take extra protocols. And so
let's talk okay, please go on. Sorry to
go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, years ago, I interned in a dispensary when I was reporting my book. And, one of the big things was customers love to smell their bud. They love to smell their flower. And I'm just thinking there ain't no way buds are getting near nostrils these days or anywhere.
That's 100% true. And so one thing I would say that we've done over the years, we've been open since end of June 2014, as we've set the bar professionally, and what we offer more than anything is a curated experience here. So all of our flower is just absolutely spectacular. It doesn't come into our store if it doesn't have a stellar nose and terpene profile. And our patients at the time when it was medical only, and now our recreational customers have come to know us for having absolutely exceptional flower. And so it hasn't really been an issue because people know our quality is so outstanding that we curate so well. We don't have 50 strains on our shelves. We have 8 to 12 indoor strains and 8 to 12 outdoor or light depth strains. And all of them are curated so that, and obviously if someone was unhappy, we encourage them, if they're unsure, to try a gram rather than a large quantity at first. But I think we've come to be known for having such consistent high quality that it's not as much of an issue for us as maybe other stores that have, say, 50 or 60 strains, and some of them are low budget or not necessarily top shelf or top quality, and they're going for a budget. We still offer value and deals and daily deals and specials, but the quality of the flower has to be at a bar where they're not going to be too upset with us.
Well, there's the old adage is that the nose knows, and
exactly.
I have to say that's one of the pleasures of buying top shelf bud is smelling it. So how do you get around that?
Well, like I said, I think our reputation speaks for itself, and
not for me. It doesn't. I got to tell you, man, I like to smell stuff, and I'm curious to know how I'm going to ever do this again when I'm in a dispensary, if I'm ever going to do it again. Do you think those days are over forever?
No, I think if you look at SARS and MERS and Ebola and all these other ones that were so scared and like the world's going to collapse kind of things, and we've moved through them. No one even thinks of SARS or MERS. It's like a back end thought. So as crazy as COVID-19 is right now, I think once it comes under control and isn't as pandemic of a nature and a lot of resistance has been built up to people who've had it and then have a resistance to it, I think we're going to see a situation where it will go back to a normalcy within, say, 6 months to a year, and maybe even sooner is my prediction, but I don't know. It could change forever, but certainly I think protocols are going to change, and the way we touch money and the way we clean our hands between every transaction now, and we have both hand sanitizers and 70 and 90% ethanol alcohol to kill virus. So we're wiping down our keyboards and our touch screens. I think there's going to be a lot more of that moving forward. But and there may be some technology that evolves. There's some jars where you can't get too close, but you can still smell it. Certainly, there might be a distance to smelling it, or a sort of a hand wafting, like maybe a foot away or 6 inches away, and kind of moving the smell towards someone. But maybe I think the days of shoving your nose into a jar might be over for a while.
I think they've been over for a while myself. But so what are the protocols that you guys have established? I mean, are you really like, you're not wafting bud he's out of a jar into people's noses, are you?
It's curbside delivery. We've altered it to be like a drive-up window, but it's walk-up. And then we have markers on the floor that we've taped and some sort of bank teller like poles at 6 foot increments, so people stay away at 6 foot. So even though we're an essential service and like a pharmacy, we're treating it like another retail business, in that the executive order from our governor was that if you're not following social distancing, we will consider shutting you down and so forth. So we're following all social distancing, 6 foot minimums. So to do that, they're walking up to the window. We have a mat in front of the window on our side. That's the windowsill, a deep windowsill with a laminated saying, please put your ID here facing us. We don't touch it. They step back 6 feet. We look at the ID. We write down their date of birth because we're going to need it again. So instead of touching it, and at that point, we ask if they're part of our rewards program. There's a phone number associated, kind of like a point system at a coffee shop that we've used. So if they do not, then we don't write that down. If they do, we take that info. And then we step back 6 feet. They grab their ID. Now they're at the window and they tell us what they want. They can look in, and our setup is still the same. So it's still comfortable in the way it looks. We adopted some very large monitors and digital menus in the last year or two anyway. And so those menus are able to be seen very easily with large images and pricing in our daily special, as well as our wall of pre-rolls, our wall of edibles, our wall of flour. And mainly we're encouraging people more and more. We've always leveraged technology to use Leafly and Leafly orders, and they're popping up on a register by that window as soon as they come in. We're encouraging people to do that so that their order will be ready for them when they arrive, and that's actually a second window. So we have your walk-up window and your Leafly pickup order window. And where I was saying is we asked that. So now I'm 6 feet back, and they're at the window and they're telling us what they want. We're writing down, we're making recommendations. If there's a flower they want or a smell they want, fruity or gassy, whatnot, we'll give our recommendations based on our experience with that. And it is a little bit of a trust situation, like I said, but our customers understand the way we've curated our flower. So, I'll be honest, Joe. So people are so thrilled that we're just open and offering service that they're not nearly as picky. They're leaving bigger tips as well, just for staying open, to keep the jobs for the employees, for offering the medicine, and so even though the experience has altered, I think there's just people are so thrilled to have the opportunity to buy top shelf medicine that is tested and clean and quality. And so we're giving a little bit more like a bartender, where the budtender name came from, a talk through of what someone's never had a drink before. They're going to walk you through it. They're not necessarily going to give you a taste of it. So, when they're looking for a hybrid or an indica, or a certain kind of gas or a nose, then we'll walk them through the options, whether it be top shelf, indoor, outdoor, or on our bargain shelf, our last call wall.
Are people smoking less? Have you noticed? I mean, it's only been a couple of weeks, I know that, but let's see. I mean, because it is COVID is associated with lung issues, are people inhaling less flour? Have you noticed upping their edibles?
It's interesting. You would think they would be, but so far our numbers aren't showing that. They're on par, or if not slightly more. I think there was some information that came out of Israel or went around the internet that THC might, counteract the effects of COVID-19. And so people are considering consuming it any way they can or prefer. Some people don't like edibles. I think we've seen a slight increase in vaping as opposed to flower, but not as much as a drop-off as one would logically think. Interesting. In flour.
And has business been up or down in the last couple of weeks?
Across the state last week, by BDS Analytics information, the statewide, it was 26% or 25% up across the board. But I would say that we're starting to see a dip or a back to normalcy this week. I think people rationed like they did at the food and the toilet paper concern, and they hoarded a little bit. And so we had a huge spike in sales right after the executive order. For the first 2 days were just astronomical sales. back to the beginning of when we opened and there was no competition. But now they've either hit to our normal numbers or just slightly below. We've also changed our hours a little bit to give our employees a break. It's so stressful already with all of this situation, and especially before enacting these full protocols, when people were coming in the store still, it was very stressful and nerve-wracking for the employees. And so we encouraged the social distancing and made sure no one was coughing before entering and so forth. But other than that, we've shortened our hours to help our employees have a little more rest. And so where we stayed open till 7 p.m. before, we're down to 6 p.m. now. And where we were 7 days a week, we've now taken Sundays off. Partly because we've had some employees not want to work, and we want to honor those feelings with the situation. And so there's been some staffing issues. I'm one of the owners. I'm working today and tomorrow due to staffing issues, whereas in the beginning I was here, but lately of the last few years I have not been on the daily, on the floor. So it's been great to reconnect with the customers and the employees, but it is a new day, and things are definitely different. I don't know if will go back to normal again, but I assume they will. I really look at SARS and MERS as examples that once it moves through society, and I think there'll be a renormalization, but I think it will linger, and there will be challenges ahead, including things like smelling it. And so,
that's one thing that I've just thought about instantly. What about how have customers changed?
More people are wearing masks. There's a little more trepidation. There's a lot more thankfulness that we're just even open and offering the service. And at the same time, I think some of it's a bit like normal, in the sense that they're just here to get their medicine and enjoy their experience and have some social interaction, and thankful that, like I said, we are open and can have some normalcy in their life. How
big is Talent, Oregon, Michael?
It's a small town of about 4,000 people. We're near Ashland, Oregon, with 20 to 25,000, and close to Medford with close to 200,000 in the overarching valley. So our whole Rogue Valley has about 250,000 people.
And how's your life changed personally, other than the fact that you're working more?
I'm spending a lot more time at home with the kids. I have 2 small kids who are home from school with my wife, as well as, the social distancing. I would say the biggest difference is my social life. We used to have gatherings and potlucks regularly 2 to 4 times a week, probably. It's a very communal kind of town. And so it's changed that way dramatically to none of those at the moment. So we're all doing some digital connecting and Zoom and whatnot and FaceTime. And then I think a friend of mine is a videographer and had a video posted on Instagram the other day, how at 7 p.m. downtown, she was in the middle of our downtown street and it was just barren. And she used the word desolate and used it as an adjective and explained what that meant. And, a place, a location deserted from people. And it was just so bizarre. And our main attraction here is the Oregon Shakespeare Festival, and it was shut down for 1 month.
Yeah.
And so that's really shut down tourism dramatically.
Final question is, do you think this is the end of the joint? I mean,
the end of the what?
The joint. Sharing a joint is a ritual that has gone on for a very long time, and I just can't imagine sharing a joint with anybody right now.
It certainly is now. I think, if anything, anyone I know who's doing it is doing the Chillum style from India, where they're putting it between their fingers, separating it.
But even that is so close. You can't. That's not a safe, protective.
Well, you're not touching any fluids at that point. You're not. No,
but you're within. Fluids. But it's been within an inch of somebody's mouth. That's insane.
It's true. But generally speaking, no. I think it's the end of the joint until this is through. Sharing them, that is. We're still selling pre-rolls galore. I think it's going to be a personal joint, is what it is.
It's a personal joint. The beginning of the personal joint. Is that it?
Right. The half grammars are going to be popular, I think, instead of the full gram joints.
I think so.
And yeah,
Michael, thank you so much for joining me from Oregon, and I wish you all the best with all these protocols. And if things continue to evolve, stay in touch. Let us hear what changes, okay?
Sounds great, Joe. Thank you so much for your time, and we'll be in touch.
Hi, listeners. We are always on the lookout for great things to talk about on the Brave New Weed podcast, and we'd love to hear from you. You can always email us at bravenewweedcast@gmail.com with links to articles, interesting news stories, personal accounts of things that you've done, or leads on books or products that we should know about. You can always contact us at bravenewweedcast@gmail.com. Joe, I'm really happy that we can continue to move through these kind of conversations in this time. I think that we're very fortunate, obviously, having internet connections that allow us to connect with people all over the world. And I think that getting that broad stretch knowledge, not just focusing on self or on our small community, and not just focusing on the news, but like hearing real stories from real people on the ground all over the place, it's really helped to put things in perspective for me. So I hope that our listeners are getting at least a part of that experience for themselves as well.
Yeah, me too. And again, listeners, if there's anything you know about or want us to talk about, please email us. It's bravenewweedcast@gmail.com. Again, bravenewweedcast@gmail.com. Matthew, thank you so much for joining again today.
Yeah, absolutely. It's always a pleasure, Joe. Take care of yourself out there and stay safe.
Desert distancing is one of the ways to go, my friend. Be well.
Thanks for listening to the Brave New Weed podcast. This episode and all future episodes are made possible by amazing listeners like yourself. If you like what you've heard, we encourage you to show your support by giving $1 a month for special access and rewards on patreon.com/bravenewweed. You can also follow us on Twitter and Instagram via @bravenewweed. Find us on Facebook at facebook.com/bravenewweed. And remember, you can always find more information about us or information discussed in each episode by pointing your favorite browser to bravenewweed.com.